Hello, Ohlone College. This is a video I'm doing for you for our second midterm. What I'm doing is I am giving us a chance to go back over one of the harder take-home questions for your first midterm. It's just a very important activity, and some of these concepts are very important to me that you properly understand them, okay? So this is the document I put together for us on what is political science and then specifically on how collective action problems work and how we can apply them in real life. Okay. Remember, collective action is action that generally speaking has two characteristics. It involves groups, not individuals. So it's things that affect us as a group. And two, it's activated or motivated by a shared interest, goal, or problem. Okay. Um, uh, Anytime, like if you live in a dorm or you have roommates or something like that, trying to get the house clean is a collective action problem. We have a set of responsibilities. We all share the house. The house is a public good in some sense. And it's a collective action problem to figure out how to get the dishes done, the floors mopped, all of that. If your individual room is dirty, that's not a collective action problem. It's your room. You clean it up. Sound like your mom now. Clean your room, right? But right, if it's your room, it's not a collective action problem. If it's the living room, the dishes, the bathroom, the floors, all of that, it is a collective action problem. Okay. Now, remember, I went over our analysis of what we call rational actor institutional theories in one of my very first videos for you. But I just want to remind ourselves of the insight, the most important parts of what was going on in those theories. The origin of these theories comes from economics, specifically behavioral, excuse me, specifically behavioral economics. The goal is to try to explain political behavior, so that is to explain what happens and why. And remember the basic insight, the sort of term, that the small phrase that they use to explain what they're doing is rules matter, or rules determine outcome, or rules affect behavior. So we're appealing to institutional rules, rights, and responsibilities to explain how people behave. Remember, we looked at the Electoral College. The Electoral College is a perfect example of this. Some states are safe states, some states are swing states, so smart politicians spend their time in swing states. Don't worry, I mean, the causal sequence stuff is important, learn it. But what I really want to talk about today for our second midterm is this notion of collective action problems. Collective action problems is any time at which the most beneficial social decision is not achieved due to an inability of individuals to effectively coordinate together. Okay, I'm going to take us through a few examples of these. The first sample example I'm going to call the free rider problem. The free rider problem occurs in a situation where there's a public good provided for free and no mechanism to enforce payment for that good or service on the part of the people who use it. For example, the microwave in your company break room. Students laugh when I talk about this sometimes, and for good reason, because they've seen that microwave. That microwave is really, really gross. Okay? The microwave in the dining hall at Ohlone College is not super gross because someone is actually has to come by and clean it. But the microwave in the faculty lounge, I don't know if it's dirty or not. It very well may be dirty because no one may be assigned to clean it. Okay? So that microwave is really nasty. Everyone gets to use it and nobody cleans it. And no one wants to be that guy who has to clean up for everybody, right? To a rational actor political scientist, however, the story doesn't end there. I should add that in. We want to try to solve a collective action problem by imagining solutions that can keep the microwave clean. So what can we do to keep the microwave clean? There's two basic ways of doing this. One, make everyone pay to have someone come in and clean it once a week. If there are 20 people in the office and it costs $20 to come pay someone for an hour, they can each agree to pay $1 a week. If this was the government, we would call that taxes, right? So we clean up pollution. Well, we all pay taxes and it goes into the pot for doing that. Or we could have people in the office rotate cleaning the microwave. Each person would only have to clean it a couple times a year, so it's not that bad. If this was the government, we might call it the draft. Kind of randomly drafted to go fight or not, okay? Now, the second one might still have some elements of a free rider problem left within it, because someone might just say, well, I don't feel like doing it this week, and just skip their week, assuming that the person who does it the week after won't skip and will actually do it. So you might have to, again, further have another mechanism to make sure that people are actually doing it. You could put someone in charge of making sure, checking off people's names, so that a keeper of the list, so to speak, keeper of the list checks the microwave every Friday. If it's not clean, he or she goes to whoever was on the list for that week and says, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You promised to clean the microwave, right? Who wants to be that guy? But we need that guy, right? There are lots of different kinds of collective action problems, okay? When we're looking at more economic versions, we frequently call them market failures. Market failure is just a subsection of collective action problems. In fact, the last one of these is not necessarily a market failure. It's more just a collective action problem in general, but that's not terribly important here. Market failures include monopoly, negative externality, under provision of goods, and common pool resource problems. Let's take a look at monopoly. So monopoly happens kind of like the game, right? The game is built off of the real life situation in which one person ends up with all the property or with all the just majority market share, okay? And then because they're so strong, they have so much market share, no one else is competitive against them. They can undercut other people's prices short term in order to drive them out of business, and then jack their own prices up again and gouge the consumer. Okay? They can provide bad service. They can overcharge for their service, right? A monopoly market failure is a breakdown of normal mechanisms of capitalist competition, and some kind of regulation is frequently suggested as the solution. So Standard Oil, for example, at one point literally controlled 90% of the oil market in the United States. Well, so there's no other game in town. You have to buy oil from the Standard Oil company. And what are you doing then? Mr. Standard is, it wasn't Mr. Standard. That was Rockefeller, if memory serves. But the company just charges you more, and because they can, there's no competition. A negative externality. A negative externality happens when a cost accrues to a third party that is not paid for in the original transaction. So pollution is a classic example of a negative externality. You buy gas, you drive around, but out of your tailpipe comes smog. Smog gets blown into the wind, blown by the wind to a neighboring city, causing health problems, etc. And who pays to fix the smog? It's a cost that's imposed on a third party. It wasn't their fault, but they have to pay to clean up your smog. That is a negative externality, okay? The solution that people usually suggest for a negative externality is often a tax, say a gas tax, which is then dedicated towards fixing smog. Or we could, charge people for how many miles they drive. We could do that. That would be another thing you could do. It's also possible to have what we call a positive externality. A positive externality is a benefit that accrues to a third party. Positive externalities are not collective action problems, but they're important to keep in mind, and they're interesting and helpful. Okay. Um, so, education is shown to have lots of positive externalities. People become educated, they're more innovative economically, they're more likely to start a business, they start a business, they make jobs for other people, etc. All of these can be viewed as positive externalities from education. Under provision of goods, okay? So one thing that happens is that free markets and individuals are really great at making certain things quite cheaply, but for other things, they're actually not always more efficient. Things that cost a lot to do but have low profit margins are examples of these types of goods. Roads, for example. If you have only private sector provide roads, then they build roads between major thoroughfares, but people trying to go to small towns are still driving on dirt roads, and it's really hard and your car gets damaged, etc. Right? And it's good to have roads to small towns, then people can drive them, go see them. Small towns can have more economic growth and things like that. Okay. So under provision of goods, the market can provide these things, but does so inefficiently. The solution for under provision of goods is usually to make something a public good, that is to have the government provide for it universally and pay for it entirely or partially through taxes. Okay, so for example, before government provided firefighters, we had private provision of fire insurance. Individuals, you had to purchase fire insurance for your house. Problem is, if you had a fire and no insurance, or even insurance from a different company, when the firefighters showed up, they would just stand there and watch your house burn, right? And sometimes, so that's your fault, whatever fault, that's not a negative externality yet. It's a negative externality, or it's a under provision of good with a negative externality when your neighbor's house catches on fire. And then even if they did pay for fire insurance, it's harder to get the fire out, and maybe that fire spreads, and then half of London or San Francisco burns down, right? And these are real cases, okay? The last one I want to look at is what we call common pool resource problems. Common pool resource problems happen when there's a public good, but the use of it exceeds the ability to provide or replenish that good. Common pool resource problems happen a lot with natural resources such as fish supply, water, timber, okay? There's no problem catching as many fish as you want, so long as there's enough fish left over to reproduce for the next year. But when we hit a situation where people are catching more fish, reducing fish stocks that they have a hard time reproducing to the same level next year, you end up in a vicious cycle where overfishing reduces fish stock, leading to more overfishing, leading to reductions of fish stock. Okay? The solution to common pool resource problems could be either government regulation or private agreements. The government can step in and say, nobody's allowed to catch more than X fish per day. You can do that. If you buy a fishing license, you have a limit on how many fish you can catch per day. Or all the fishing companies can get together and agree on how many fish to catch. So they can just get together, make a private agreement. We all agree to only catch this many fish per day, because by doing that, we leave enough left over for next year and we can come back and all fish again next year. Okay? Either way, some kind of central enforcement is necessary to make sure nobody cheats by trying to catch more than their fair share of fish. Okay? Common pool resource problems were most famously and recently and famously examined in the book by the Nobel Prize for Economics winner Elinor Ostrom, titled Tragedy of the Commons. Also, last year's Nobel Prize for Economics, Richard Thaler, works within the assumptions of behavioral economics, and a nice write-up of his work can be found at the link. Okay, a lot of the really interesting contemporary stuff happening these days is in this behavioral economics, rational actor, institutional way of thinking. Okay, now let's play a game. Let's see how well you can do. Either have this document printed or make sure you have your notes with you. But remember, we have, we have basically we have five collective action problems. We have free rider problem, we have monopoly, we have negative externality, under provision of goods, and common pool resource problems, okay? So now let's play a game. Let's play the collective action game, okay? Play at home. This will be part of your, remember this is going to be part of your second midterm. So for your second midterm, you're going to write up your responses to this game and then try to imagine some other scenarios that you could come up with yourself. So here's what we're going to do. The goal is name the collective action problem, okay? And I will read to you a scenario, and you'll do at home, try to do two things. One, you'll try to name the collective action problem. Two, you'll imagine an appropriate solution. So what solution could we have? And a solution should be a new rule or enforcement mechanism to make sure that the socially optimal situation is achieved. So for each one of these, just have, case number one, I put scenario number one, and then name the problem, imagine the appropriate solution. First problem, scenario, the tip at dinner. You go to dinner with some friends and all agree to pay for your own meal and then put in extra for the tip. As you count the money, however, you realize that the tip is short. Somebody did not put in their fair share of the tip. What collection action problem is this, and what solution might we have? So, take a second and think about it. You're at dinner. We all agree to pay for our own meal and then throw in for the tip. Someone doesn't throw in enough for the tip. What collective action problem in this and why? If you said the free rider problem, you are correct. Why? We all have to pay for dinner, but somebody isn't paying their fair share for the tip, which we all do together, a public problem. So the tip is the most collective action part here. The tip is the microwave in the company lounge. Someone's not cleaning the microwave. Someone's not putting in their fair share for the tip. And the solution could be, we're going to put one person of the group in charge for collecting the money. He or she will collect individually and make sure everybody is paid the right amount, including especially for the tip. Okay? So see how this works? This is a fun little game. Scenario 2, the car wash. And these are all real scenarios too. Like this one also built from an actual scenario that a friend of mine worked on one time, okay? There's a corn wash on the corner of a wetland nature preserve for birds. So it's kind of across the street from a wetland nature preserve, okay? Wetlands are kind of marshlands where birds fly and it's bird habitat, so bird watchers like it, etc., right? It's public land. Every time a car gets washed, soap flows into the wetlands, and birds don't go to that part of the nature preserve to eat. So you're like literally polluting part of the nature reserve. Bird watchers are also annoyed as this is the most accessible part of the wetlands. This is where you walk in. What collective action problem is this, and what solution might we have? So remember, car wash, perfectly reasonable, legitimate business, but water is flowing down into the wetlands, causing trouble in the wetlands. If you said negative externality, then you are correct. Okay. Why? A cost is being borne by a third party, birds and bird watchers. Okay. And the solution, well, we could have the car wash build a better drainage system, thereby preventing overflow into the wetlands, right? So that's a simple way of dealing with a negative externality, is basically make sure this water is going into the sewer where it can be treated and not into the wetlands where it annoys birds. You might also want to have the car wash pay for cleanup. In this case, however, wetlands rejuvenate themselves relatively quickly. As long as you stop continuing to pollute, it'll probably be okay. This was a scenario that a friend of mine worked on when she was in college, and she was doing ecology type stuff, and she actually got the car wash to clean up their act. They didn't pay for cleaning up the wetlands, but they dealt with their waste better. Okay. Situation number 3. Again, a real situation. This one actually happened to me. Well, happens to all of us, but I had a particularly bad experience. You go to the ballpark to watch the Oakland A's play baseball. This literally I did. You get hungry and order a hot dog from the stand. It costs $10. The bun is stale and it's been sitting on the rack for 3 hours. You wish there was another vendor from which you could buy food, but you can't leave the ballpark. What collective action problem is this, and how might it be solved? So you're stuck in the ballpark, right? That's the key sort of like point here. You're stuck in the ballpark, and then also you have to buy a dog from them. There's no other place to buy it from, and it's really expensive and not very high quality. Okay. So the debrief. This is a monopoly problem. Okay, why? There's no one else to buy a hot dog from. Solution, well, we could theoretically require stadiums to allow anyone to sell or something like that. But it's not really necessary in this case. I mean, it's just an example. Ballparks make a lot of money from their concessions. You're going to see the game. You face the same problem at a movie theater where the food is really bad as well and overpriced. That's just, it's not considered in this case to be particularly problematic because you're only in the ballpark or the movie for 2 to 3 hours. You can eat before you go in or whatever. If this was the entire country and it was Standard Oil and you had no other place to go to buy oil, then breaking up Standard Oil might actually make sense, right? You can just make them sell off pieces of their company. Scenario number 4, the shade tree. I planted a tree in my backyard for food so I could have some nice fruit in the summers. After a few years, it grows big enough to actually shade my neighbor's house, especially in the summer months when it is so hot. What kind of collective action problem is this, and what is the solution? This one is a bit of a trick question. This one's not a collective action problem per se. It's a positive externality. I get fruit, she gets shade, and that's really nice. We'll finish with this one, scenario number 5. We might do one more. Due to the recent drought, farmers in the Central Valley dug more water wells than ever. Problem is, groundwater is only replenished at a very slow rate, and if the aquifers get overused, the ground will literally sink, therefore reducing future supply of groundwater. The more wells you dig, the faster the ground sinks, and the greater the incentive for any single farmer to get as much water now as he can. What collective action problem is this, and what is the solution? Debrief. This is a common pool resource problem, right? Everyone gets access to it. There's no regulations, but it doesn't replenish fast enough. We use it faster than we can get it back. But once we're in this situation, the most rational thing to do is to use as much of it as you can before we all run out. And that's your debrief. Okay. We'll finish with this one, the sidewalk, because I also did positive externalities. In my neighborhood, sidewalks are optional and must be paid for by the owner of the house. While most people are happy to pay for sidewalk installation and repair, every block there's a house or two that refuses or simply can't afford to pay. This causes inconvenience to everybody, and we all wish we could just have sidewalks everywhere. What collective action problem is this? What solution might there be? Oh, so this one is, this is the last one we'll look at. This one, the collective action problem is under provision of goods, right? Not everyone can afford to pay for their sidewalk, just like not everyone could afford to, say, pave a road in front of their house. And so if we're all being inconvenienced by this, the solution is to make it a public good and make the government pay for it for everybody. Okay? So now remember, for your test, what I want to see you do is try to come up with a couple of situations, a couple of collective action problems that are your own, that you can kind of like see in your own life somewhere, okay? So have fun with it. I mean, maybe it's like video games or, whatever. I'm sure, some of this stuff starts to make some sense to you. Okay, so that's my video, and I hope you enjoy it.